All right, and lastly, we're going to think about supply shifters. So first I'm going to define what a supply increase and what a supply decrease look like. Then we're going to talk about the shifters of the supply curve, of the market supply curve. So first of all, increase is going to be a rightward shift in the supply curve. So I don't want you to think about increase and decrease in the supply curve as being up and down. That's when you'll get it wrong, because an increase is actually a rightward shift and a decrease is a leftward shift. And so let's explain this. Increase is an increase in quantity at each price, or it's a decrease in their willingness to accept for each quantity. Okay, so what does that look like? The quantity on the horizontal axis, price here, draw an upward sloping supply curve. And so what I want you to think about again is a supplier facing two prices that represent all the different prices along that axis, low prices and high prices. And they're originally going to supply some quantity, Q1, Q naught. An increase in supply means that for any given price level in the market, the supplier can afford to supply more quantity, right? And so that's why we have a rightward shift representing an increase. If prices were $10 before and the company could only afford to produce 100 units at $10, then their costs get lowered. We can see that they can increase supply. They can produce more units than before at each price level. Right? Something has changed to increase the quantity they can supply at every price level. Equivalently, you can think about this as a drop in the minimum price that they're able to accept for producing. So a lot of times we think about costs shifting supply. If suppliers are able to produce at a produce cheaply, then they can lower the price that they can charge. Right? They can have lower prices to produce the same quantity, or equivalently, they can produce more quantity at the same price. If instead we're thinking about a decrease, we're thinking about a drop in quantity at each price level, or an increase in willingness to accept at each quantity. So let's draw this. Get our prices up here. Okay, and let's do this definition here. A drop in the quantity each price level. So let's suppose costs go up on a firm. They face regulation, they're running out of resources, whatever. Then this supply curve is going to shift left. And so we will see that at every price level, the firm can afford to produce less quantity than before. You see that? Now the reason why I don't want you to think about an increase and a decrease as up and down in this class, and I want you to think about them as right and left, is because look what happens if you said an increase is an upward shift in the supply curve. You would draw the supply curve higher, but you would be wrong, because that would actually correspond to a decrease in quantity at each price. And an increase is a rightward shift for suppliers. A decrease is a leftward shift for suppliers. All right. Your main shifter for the supply curve is going to be costs. Shifters in production costs, shifters in the supply curve often come through changes in production costs. So, for example, technology. why do you think Henry Ford was able to afford, why do you think Henry Ford was able to sell cars at such a reasonable price when he started producing Model Ts? Well, Henry Ford invented the assembly line, a belt-driven assembly line. It's an unprecedented piece of technology, which allowed him to lower his cost per unit of production. And since he lowered his costs, he was able to produce a product at a lower price. Or at the same price level, he was able to produce more Model Ts. So technology often increases supply. I want you to try and draw what happens to the supply curve if a union negotiates higher wages. So let's draw a supply curve. For the firm, and you tell me what happens to this firm's supply curve when they're forced to pay each worker higher wages. What happens to this market supply curve, these firms, when they have to pay higher wages? So pause it and give it a try. Okay, so what has happened here, this shifter is called a cost of input change. Workers are an input to production. When their cost goes up, firms have to pay more to produce the good, so they're going to ask for higher prices. That leftward supply shift. So you can either think about it this way. To produce the same number of goods and pay their employees more, they have to charge higher prices. Or to produce the same number, or to produce at the same price level, they're going to have to lower the amount they produce because it's now more expensive to produce that good. You have to pay your workers more. Does that make sense? I say this into the camera like you can actually answer me. Okay. Another thing we'll learn, especially later on, when we study firms in bigger detail, is that another shifter is firms entering and leaving the market. And so, why does supply shift when firms enter? Well, think about the demand curve. How did we get from individual demand curves to market demand curves? We did a horizontal sum. Same thing here. Market supply is a horizontal sum of quantity supplied at each price. Right? So, let's think about it this way. We have some good and two prices. Oops, that's a demand curve. There's supply for firm A. And here's supply for firm B. So let's suppose that we have two firms, A and B. At $1, firm A produces 1. At $1, firm B produces 2. At $2, firm A produces 2. And at $2, firm B produces 4. So if you had to get their market supply curve, how would you do it? Pause the video and see if you can draw it. Okay, we would take the horizontal sum, right? So, let's just continue this line out. At $1, firm A is going to supply 1 unit to the market. Firm B is going to supply 2 units to the market. So together, both firms supply 3 units. At $2, firm A supplies 2 to the market. Firm B supplies 4 to the market. So together, they supply 6. And so if we did this for every possible price and quantity supplied, we would have a market supply curve that looks like this. If we keep adding firms in, then this curve keeps shifting outward to the right. More firms, increase in supply. And suppose we have a recession and firms start failing and exiting the market. As they start leaving, there's less to add in, and the supply curve goes left. All right, now you know everything about supply and demand. When we start back on Monday, we're going to begin thinking about equilibrium.